Everyone, welcome. You're listening to 27 Degrees SAG, which is the Galactic Center. And we have a wonderful, wonderful guest for you this evening. But before we get started, I'm your host, Kimla Lowe, and I am running a seminar on January 23rd on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern for the upcoming New Year of the Tiger. Yes, the Chinese New Year is upon us. We need to prepare for this fierce year that's coming at us, 2022. And I want to give you all of the secrets for success for this upcoming year. So go to my website, kimlalowe.com, and sign up now, because we are getting to be a pretty hefty group, and I want to make sure that everybody gets in that wants these tips. I am not going to record it. We need to show up and we need to have this great synergy all together. It is a Zoom seminar, and I know you're going to love it, and you are just going to have the edge over everyone to begin the new year. Our moon tonight, as the sun is entering into the air sign of Aquarius, our moon is in Leo. So we have this wonderful, dramatic, big-hearted push for humanity, and it begins with each and every one of us. And yesterday, Uranus went direct, which rules Aquarius. So if you have felt like you've been stuck in the weeds and you can't get out and nothing's been going your way, this is the week where it all pushes together. That full wolf moon in Cancer was just the culmination and the highlight of energy that we really needed. And I'll tell you what, we've got all the elements now just pushing in our direction. It's going to really kind of lift us up so that we can finish off our action, our Mars in Sagittarius, and get ready for Mars in Capricorn next week. And Venus goes direct next week too. We've got so much going on. I'd love to tell you what's happening personally in your astrological chart. I've got two different sessions that you may be interested in. One is 30 minutes and one is a whole hour with me. I'd love to introduce you to what's coming up so we can make a timeline for exactly what your intentions are and what you want to accomplish in 2022. All right, let's get right to the show because we have a fabulous guest from the UK this evening. His name is Paul Bestall, and he is a field investigator. He's got all of these wonderful interests, and he also has a podcast on YouTube, and that is Mysteries and Monsters. I want you to put your hands together, and we are going to go through all of his unusual interest in the phenomena of the unseen energy, the seen energy, the things you always have heard about, but you've never explored. Put your hands together for my guest, Paul Bestall. Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, and thank you for a lovely introduction. I'm feeling a little intimidated now, but thank you. That was lovely.
Well, you know what? A lot of us have all of these interests that we want to know about, you know, UFOs and abductions and objects that have this history of being cursed, or we have interests in Bigfoot. Some people call it Sasquatch, or the Jersey Devil, or vampires, or all of this kind of this wonderful stuff that we have all heard about. Do we really believe in it? Is it really just a tale someone spun a long time ago and keeps that, you know, that story kind of up in, you know, in the future or in the present? But you actually have gone and done some research on all of this. And I want to know how your little life in the UK started out and got you on this really cool path of exploration of all of this unusual phenomena.
Well, I think it was something I was kind of born into, because my grandmother was a psychic, and she would do readings. Obviously, at the time, Kimla, I wasn't very aware of what she was doing. I just didn't understand why my grandmother seemed to be so popular. And obviously, when people would come for readings and things, I'd be ushered out of the room, and she would deal with that. And that was kind of something I grew up with. But tallied with that, as a small child, we were living in a converted vicarage in a small town in Yorkshire where I grew up. And we ended up finding a grave in the front garden. And unfortunately, that seemed to be the catalyst to bring us a sort of spiritual lodger, shall we say. And so for the final 2 years of living in that particular property, we were sort of suffering from a manifestation of a haunting, which wasn't particularly malicious. It was more mischievous than anything. So I kind of had a very early introduction into the world of the weird and the paranormal. So I didn't really have much choice, I suppose.
Wow. And so when this happened and you kind of disturbed the peace, so to speak.
Yes.
This was your first introduction into unseen energy and how it could really, affect your everyday life, I suppose. And
Yeah.
so when you moved, did the spirit stay with the house?
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of things, because we moved a couple of miles away, and other than one or two strange incidents, which I can't really categorically say were paranormal, they were weird, but I'm not suspecting that they perhaps were paranormal. It seemed that it stayed where it was, and like I say, it wasn't particularly malicious or anything. It was quite a cheeky haunting. It used to it had a thing for flushing the toilet.
No.
And it used to pull the chain. It was one of the old toilets where you would have to pull the chain to cause it to flush. Whereas these days, obviously modern toilets, sometimes you could say, well, perhaps that might be some kind of automatic response, or perhaps the plumbing's not working properly, but you had to physically pull the chain in so you could hear it. So whenever the toilet started flushing, we knew we were going to have some fun that evening, shall we say.
Wow. I know I have a lot of family members and a lot of clients that have perhaps cheeky little spirits hanging around as well. So they're delighted in hearing your story too. What did you get involved in kind of going out and researching UFOs?
Well, that's always something I've had a long interest in prior to even my particular sighting, which I'll probably mention later on. But obviously, growing up at that age, Kimla, it was a very big period here in the UK. We had two very notable cases happen. One made the headlines at the time, which was a gentleman called Alan Godfrey, who was a police officer in a town called Todmorden, which is in West Yorkshire. And that happened November 1980. And Alan had a very interesting encounter during his duty as a police officer. And then obviously a couple of years later, it all came out about what had happened at Rendlesham down in Suffolk over Christmas that year as well. So it seemed like it was a very interesting period for that kind of thing. And I've always, like I said, obviously, and living in a haunted house and having a psychic grandmother, you would think I would tend to sort of gravitate towards that kind of thing. But I was just really interested in all things. So monsters and ghosts and vampires and UFOs and everything, it all kind of just built up inside of me. So it was something that I kind of carried on, and I've continued to do as I've become an adult and kind of done some research and been out in the field and gone to a lot of locations where incidents have happened around the UK.
Wow. And so did you grow up watching the movies in Hollywood and thinking, oh, yeah, that's real and that's how it really is? Or was it like, oh, they have it so wrong?
Well, yeah. I was. I had very eclectic parents, so they sort of fed my obsession. I used to be obsessed with the Universal films as a child, so the original Dracula and Frankenstein and the Invisible Man and things like that, Kimla. And my father was obsessed with War of the Worlds, the H.G. Wells, version, which there was a big album at the end of the 1970s that came out, and he used to wind me up and tell me it was a true story. And obviously we didn't talk about it because of what happened. So, you know, when you're 7, you're pretty gullible, I suppose. So it kind of, they kind of allowed me to sort of dive into my interests and just enjoy myself. And really, I kind of look back at those days, and it's one of those things. I think sometimes we could look back and wish we'd done a bit more. But you know, I was always getting books about ghosts for Christmas and UFOs and things like that. So they certainly fed my addictions in regards to my strange hobbies as a child.
Yeah. You know, I it's funny, but I have this theory that children tell you their gifts, and they tell you their purpose of why they're on the planet before the age of 5. And I have this theory that whatever they're interested in, or they pick up a ball, and let's just say they know how to play soccer, it's the natural talent, or they pick up a pen or a paintbrush, and they go to town on it, and or they start dancing at a very early age. And I remember I was having seances by the time I was 6 years old. And so I knew that I could talk to people on the other side, and I wasn't afraid. And I had a lot of questions, especially for Marilyn Monroe. So I brought home from the library, from the school library, and they did have these books in my school. It was all about how to chart an astrology chart. So by the time I was 10 years old, there wasn't computers back then. I'm that old, but
I'm not that far, but I remember those days as well.
Yeah, and I was delighted when the programs came in. Don't get me wrong, but I learned how to properly chart, an astrology chart with all of the books and everything else. So as you're growing up in this psychic household, and it's very well accepted in unseen energy. I was wondering, because I didn't grow up in an accepting type of a situation like that. Do you feel as though that kind of opened the channel around you to really maybe make contact, or perhaps have your energy field expand a little bit so that you could encounter some things later down the road?
I mean, that's a very interesting point, because I think I'm quite a deep thinker when it comes to the paranormal and psychic abilities and things like that, Kimla, because I often wonder, why is it that some people can live in a haunted property and have experiences, and then other people that there seems to be nothing going on, or people get feelings, or people seem to make connections that perhaps they're not sure of. And I'm not sure if that, like you say, when we're children, I think that's when we're the most open we are, and we don't fall into the bias that comes with being an adult, and we're not controlled by what we're supposed to be like. We don't have that kind of framework that pens us in, I think. And I think I'm always interested when I hear people talk about their children having imaginary friends, because I'm not sure some of them are imaginary. And it's very interesting that when we kind of, especially I think these days, I think we live in a society that allows people to be more open in regards to these interests and beliefs and possibilities for channeling their abilities or their connections, whatever you'd like to call it. So I'm not sure. I often think, are we predestined as a child to follow a path? Because I kind of not really lost my interest, but I kind of normal life got in the way for the best part of 20 years. And I really kind of sort of reconnected with my love of all these subjects about 5 years ago. And that's just kind of just gone like that, really. A bit like a UFO, to be fair, landing and shooting off back into the sky, Kimla, because it's, I basically got to a point a few years ago where I just thought, to hell with it. Why don't I indulge my love of these subjects? I adored them as a child, and I think, like with most of us, when we become teenagers, we try to fit in, and sometimes we can kind of create a version of ourselves that isn't really true. So I think some people certainly are destined to end up where they're supposed to be, and I think how my life's turned out the last few years, I think I've gone the long way around, but I've got there in the end.
Yeah, I did the life thing too, and I think that's, you kind of start out showing everyone what your inside gifts are, and then you have to really go out, because another purpose that we're here is to procreate and to do 3D life. So I think that's funny, but now that we can get back to our purpose and get back on track, it just seems that more and more people, regular people, are having UFO sightings, or they are experiencing intuition, or perhaps deja vu, or all of these kinds of things that they never thought that they would experience in a million years. And then a lot of people are doing hypnosis during this time, or they're having their ancestry checked for DNA. And, they're having all of this openness about where they came from. And I have a feeling that this is a thirst, or this is something that is really a curiosity that brings in the galactic quotient into our lives. And I think everybody is getting to be a little bit more curious than perhaps their mom and dad were, or their families were in the past, or more open about it. So when you get curious about UFOs,
Yes.
what makes one go out in the middle of the night and explore UFO sightings, and to kind of track down portals and different places where people have seen unusual lights in the sky and things like that. I know you're one of them, so tell me, what makes you get up and go, let's go track down a UFO?
I like to get answers. I think I'm very fortunate as well, because I live in a major city that for many years has been sort of on a flight path. I live near one of Britain's national parks, which is called the Peak District, Kimla, which is a historic location which is full of stories of ghosts and killer mermaids that live in ponds, and bogarts and screaming skulls and UFOs flying about and ghostly dogs. So I'm spoilt for choice, really, because there are so many great places to go. And I just like to go. I think when you have an opportunity, and to be fair, Britain's pretty small compared to some states in America, never mind America. So it's not that hard to get places, really. A couple of hours and you can be most places in the north of England, and that really helps. And we seem to be quite popular when it comes to UFO visiting us here. So I just want to go. And I think when you go somewhere, even if it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years after something's happened, I think you get a real feeling of a place. And I like to kind of, like when I went to Todmorden, where as I mentioned earlier, Alan Godfrey had his experience as a police officer, Kimla. I walked down the road where he had his missing time, and he saw this strange craft flashing about. I've been to the places in the Peak District where people saw UFOs dancing across the sky and apparently landing. Obviously, I've been to the East Coast with Bob, our mutual friend Bob Brown and Paul Sinclair, and spent an evening, spotting UFO spotting there and looking at some of the footage that those guys have caught. So for me, I think it's trying to be, because I'm, as much as I'd like to give the impression that perhaps I may sound a bit fearless and blasé about this, Kim, there is always the thought at the back of my head, what if something decides to come back, and how would I deal with that close up, really? So some would say fearless, others would say foolhardy.
So do you feel as though you were ever abducted or taken on a ship?
No. I think it's one of those situations where I've spoken with a few people when we talk about the perception of paranormal incidents. And is it that if you are more prone to believe in hauntings or things like that, that you will gravitate for explanations as a child or a person, that if something strange happens where you are or something disturbs you during your sleep, you will automatically think it's a ghost? But if you're more naturally inclined to believe in alien visitation and abduction, would you automatically, the same kind of incident, would you think of it as something to do with ufology or an abduction or an experience in that regard? And I find that quite an interesting philosophy, because I don't think it's a one size fits all. What one person may think is a ghost, another person may believe it to be an abduction. So not that I'm aware of, but that doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't happened to me, does it? And I've certainly learned that over the years, Kimla.
Right. So when we're talking about, unusual phenomena, there's, and you mentioned it, there's so much history. I mean, the UK has been inhabited for so much longer, and the records are all there than the States. We're kind of a young, little tiny tot compared to the UK and all the history. But when when you really kind of think about Bigfoot and Sasquatch and all of that, I don't know, but is it the same in the United States as it is in the UK as far as Bigfoot, sightings and things?
Well, that's, to say it's controversial would be an understatement, Kimla, because to most people here in the UK, there's nothing in the UK in regards to that kind of thing, or Europe. And as a massive, I mean, if you have to pin me down on what one of my favorite subjects is, it's probably Bigfoot. So I have reams and reams of books. I have more books than you can shake a Sasquatch at in regards to Bigfoot, really. I love it, and I have done since I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film as a child. I've been obsessed with Bigfoot, the Yeti. I love, I have books on the Yowie, which is the Australian version, the Yeren, which is the Chinese hairy man, Almasties, which are found in Russia and the Russian region. So I'm a big thing for hairy humanoids, Kimla.
Well, have you ever seen one, or have you ever been on an exploration to kind of track one down?
Not yet. I have, thanks to doing the show, and obviously once we're all allowed to go where we can, I have an open invitation to go Bigfoot hunting in the States in 3 or 4 locations. And if there is one thing I do with my life, Kimla, before I pass on to wherever we go, I will be coming to the US and I will be going to look for Bigfoot wherever I go, be it in Washington State, or I might come to Florida looking for the skunk ape. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's pretty close by where I reside. So that's why I was kind of wondering about that. I just can't believe in this time, in this age, that we have not solved this, that we have not had a little bit more of a confrontation with Bigfoot, and that we haven't had, let's just say, a meeting of the minds and some validation as to what exactly this is, and how long it's been going on, and where it came from, and DNA from it. Really, I mean, I just can't believe we haven't nailed this down yet.
I will be brutally honest. You could ask me 99 times out of 100, and I will say I believe in Bigfoot. And then I will have a day when I think exactly what you've just pointed out there, Kimla. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll just go, it's nonsense. Like, why do I believe in this? Because we've got no DNA. My father was a scientist growing up, so I believe in evidence and proof. But also, my mother's side of the family were deeply into the paranormal. So I'm kind of a mixture of a skeptical believer, if there is such a thing. So I'm a bit of a contradiction at the best of times. So I will heartily agree with you there that it seems ridiculous that here we are in 2022 and we still don't have categorical proof of any of them. Not just, Bigfoot and the Sasquatch. You could say that about the Yeti or the Yowie or wherever. It seems remarkable. And I'm one of those people, I've read enough and seen enough and heard enough to know that I would never say, I don't ever want to be one of those people saying, well, this will be the year that we prove it. Because when I've spoken with people and I've read books written by people, who have been out there 60, 70 years, Kimla, and they still don't have any. I mean, Peter Byrne is a shining example of a man who has been involved in cryptozoology, the search for mysterious animals and unknown animals, since the early 50s, 70 years. He lives in Oregon. He's 95. He still goes out looking for Bigfoot. He's been doing it 70 years. So he would say that he knows that it's true and he knows that it's real, but he's still searching for that final kernel of evidence or that final piece of proof that will finally take us from the realms of belief and superstition to actual physical scientific proof. So I agree with what you're saying, and I can't really disprove it, though I hope to heaven that the big hairy guys are out there somewhere. They're just good at hiding.
Right. They're so elusive. And, I mean, the idea of camping and the idea of hiking and, being out in nature it's so wonderful because you get such a grounding and you get such an opportunity to really align your heartbeat with planet Earth itself and with nature, and really kind of, if you really get quiet, you can actually hear conversations and you can hear nature trying to talk to you. And the only thing and I have a huge fear of these big hairy animals, and I have a fear of everybody else doing it too. And I don't have a fear at all about galactic contact. None. Zero. I think I have probably gone up in a spaceship before. I probably have many, many friends. I know that I've been in front of the Galactic Council. For me, I have no fear about that whatsoever. But the elusive Bigfoot scares me. It just terrifies me. I know. I'm looking at the comments in the chat room. I want to say hi, everybody. Thanks for shaking up our super chat. Thanks for coming along with us. And my guest, Paul Bestall, tonight. And I want to say hi to Yvonne and Vonda and Bill and Sheila and everyone else that made it into the chat. I want to say hi to Carla and Sheena and Liana and Kyla. And, when we start talking about all of this, these kind of phenomenal, when I think of the UK and where you are, I automatically think of, yes, their UFO sightings and all of that. But I also go back to like Jack the Ripper and vampires and those kinds of things that, have been in the stories for centuries.
Mm.
And I'm just, I'm kind of curious about your take on vampires. And do you think that's something that still exists and walks the streets?
Well, I mean, I have a deep love of vampires. I recently went to Whitby last year for a few days, which is obviously in the book is where Dracula lands when he arrives in England, um, to to wreak his bloody havoc on our fair population here, Kimla. So Dracula is, and as I touched on, as a massive fan of the Universal films, is something I feel like I've known him all my life. And I've been fortunate enough. I've interviewed a wonderful author from America called A.P. Silver, who wrote a fabulous book on vampires and vampirology, because it's something I'm once again I'm really interested in. I have a thing for Chinese vampires because they're a little bit different to what we know.
Oh, tell us about that.
Yeah, so Chinese vampires, it's more of a curse than obviously what we know, where the Western tradition of the vampire is that you become a vampire in most examples through unfortunately meeting another one and them deciding to have a little nibble on you. Whereas the Chinese, it can be a curse, you can be afflicted, you could be buried in the wrong way, you could basically be predestined to become a vampire through bad luck, simply by having the wrong burial plot. And they're just full of wonderful little quirks, like they hop. They don't sort of run or fly or anything, they hop about.
Oh, that's what you're talking about. Yes, I've studied with the Chinese masters, so I'm familiar with hungry ghosts, they call them.
Yes, yeah. So it's a very similar kind of thing with that they all like to hop, and they have things that you have to use glutinous rice to help people that may have been attacked by a Chinese vampire, and they tend to stab you with their nails rather than bite you. And so they'll puncture you with their nails and then they'll drink your blood. And then obviously you will then become a vampire that way. And once again, for them, it's more to do with fire. It seems to be the only way to get rid of a Chinese vampire.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, absolutely.
So, but it's little things like that, like little weird nuances, like certain parts of Europe, the only way to get away from a vampire is to make them count, because ironically they're obsessed with counting things. So you would give them lots and lots of coins, and that would be the only way you could get away from them, and things like that, which always makes me think about the Count from Sesame Street, because he is a vampire.
Of that Count Dracula.
Yeah, so I think, and I mentioned it when I spoke with AP Silver about this, that I think whoever invented that character for Sesame Street, their family must have been from Eastern Europe, because it seems a bit too much of a coincidence that there's a tradition of vampires being addicted to counting in certain parts of Eastern Europe, and then we have this lovable character on a children's TV show who is a vampire that's obsessed with counting. So who knows? Right.
Wow. Such a connection there. Yeah.
I might be completely wrong, Kimla, but it's my argument. I'm sticking with it.
I doubt it. It just totally resonated with me. Yeah. Totally resonated with me. Vampires, with all of the movies and everything that we have, that there's been a little bit of a resurgence. Am I correct in saying this, that it's coming back? And it's one of those things that I think we've kind of let our guard down a little bit about the DNA and the blood and the soul sucking and this kind of thing. I mean, do you think this is a new resurgence of this? I mean, it's always been there, but
I think you could look at it that often. I mean, some people would say that the vampire myth is a social piece of literature that tells us about how we are in society and how we treat people. And there will be those. I mean, you can go to Eastern Europe and you can meet people who will categorically tell you that vampires are 100% real. There was a recent case 10, 15 years ago in Romania, where they were convinced that a former member of their village had come back from the dead, and there was a massive scandal, and people were charged with desecration of a grave, and the corpse had been beheaded and all sorts. So it would be very easy for me to sit here in my very well-heated, well-lit room, Kimla, and say that vampires don't exist and it's all nonsense. But I'm not brave enough or stupid enough to say such things. That's the one thing I've learned over the years, is never say never, especially about something that seems to be so ingrained across the world as well. You can't sort of say, oh, well, it's just European, as I've been mentioning about China and Eastern Asian nations. There are numerous varieties of these legends all around the world, and similarly to dragons, there has to be a starting point for these stories. They can't just have spread from nowhere, or sort of people have passed stories on across countries, because some of these legends and stories go back centuries and even millennia, when we know people from China and Europe weren't communicating. So how did the vampire legend start in Europe and China at the same time? Right. How can that be possible? Because these people they couldn't even speak the same language, so they were hardly going to be able to tell the story. The fact that they weren't even in communication as well. So when you look at things like that, it really does make you think, well, is there more to it? And is it, once again, one of those things that they've gone out of the way because they don't really like us very much unless they need a drink?
Well, the same thing, with Greek mythology, right? With Greek mythology and how the god came down and mated with humans, and now we have these, right? I mean, all of these myths and tales and stories have got to have a basis to it somewhere. And as you go back through, it's like a puzzle. You start putting the pieces together, and it's amazing, what you really come up with. And I just find that it's absolutely fascinating when you talk about energy. I'm all about unseen energy, and I'm all about really validating the unseen energy, whether it's around your body or your home. The way that I work with feng shui and placement and design and all of that. And that's what's very curious to me about objects that hold what you call like a cursed object, or or a negative energy, because I do clearings myself, and I've run into these, I want to say, balls of very, very low energy, and they carry a very violent nature with them. And just wanting to kind of run by you if you've ever encountered objects that hold these kinds of energies within them.
I have had, obviously these days, most of my friends are very open with me if they want to talk about strange things. And I've a friend of mine who was absolutely convinced that they had a teddy bear. Now, most of the time when we hear about inanimate objects, there tends to be a sort of cliche that it's a doll or a clown doll. But he was, and it's a man as well, that was adamant that he had a teddy bear, and this bear was evil. And it was one of those that he only told me this a couple of years ago as well, and I've known him a very long time. So it's very good doing the show now, Kimla, that some of my friends are telling me some of their deepest and darkest secrets, which is good. And it's very good in regards to that kind of aspect, that I now get stories that people have never shared with me as long as I've known them. And he was absolutely adamant that this bear would move around his his bedroom at night, it would be on the chest of drawers, and then he'd get up in the morning and it would be by the door, or it would be on a chair, and then it would be under his bed. Now, he was the only child, and I deeply doubt that one of his parents was coming in and moving this bear about to try and terrify him. And eventually they just got rid of it. They threw it away. And it wasn't one of those where the bear came back. One morning he woke up and the bear was back in his bedroom. So that's a very interesting thing, because it's something that there are certain objects here in the UK that are in museums. We know a friend of mine did a big report on the Crying Boy paintings, which were supposed to be cursed. That caused a big furore in the 1980s here in the UK, Kimla, where people had this picture of a crying boy, and it was a wildly popular painting. And then a spate of house fires started, and these paintings would be unscathed. And that actually started here in Sheffield. And so a couple of years ago, I went to a folklore conference, and he's been collecting them. And he fetched about 10 of these different paintings, and he lined them all up against the wall next to the door. And it was really funny, because he did this lecture about these paintings and things. And, you sat with lots of intellectual people and, professors and doctors and the like. And when the lecture finished, he left the pictures by the door, and you could see people like that against the wall, desperately trying to get out of the door but put as much space as they possibly could between themselves and these paintings, even though these would be people you would suggest would not believe in such nonsense. And yet clearly, even on that, well, I'm not sure if it is true, but I don't want to risk coming close to these cursed paintings. It was really fascinating to see these very allegedly balanced and knowledgeable people, Kimla, being terrified by a picture of a crying boy.
Right. Well, absolutely. And I myself, I was commissioned to come in and feng shui a home in Long Island. Mm-hmm. And in this particular house, when I received the floor plan, which I usually request the floor plan before I go in, because they were trying to add on to the home, and they were working with an architect and etc. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at the floor plan, I meditated on it, and I could see a very, very dark entity inside their daughter, and the daughter was in high school, inside of her closet. And I could see this. And I said, before I come in to add more energy into the house to expand and to enhance the energy of the house itself, we need to declutter, and we need to clear this energy out. Now, when I arrived, I made sure that I had two other people with me. One was the owner of the home, and another was a very good friend of mine that knew the work that I did. I also made sure that I didn't take in any food. And I had a rosary with a cross on it that I wore around my neck. And I asked Archangel Michael to walk in with me. I have to tell you, Paul, I felt his presence behind me. Huge. I mean, he's huge. He put his hands right here on my shoulders. And I walked right into the room, and I went to the closet, and I felt like this is where this particular ball of energy that was brutal, just brutal. When I opened the closet door, I could feel the energy was like syrup, like a heavy, thick syrup. And I started to communicate with this particular entity through my third eye. And it was a telepathic conversation. But I said, you have got to leave. And I instructed the owner of the house to go down and open the front door because we were upstairs. She went down the stairs, opened the front door so that there was an exit route for this entity. And this particular entity had this voice that communicated, I mean, I didn't hear it. I knew it.
Yeah.
It was weird. But it said, no, I have been here a very long time. And I said, your time is up. You must leave. And with that, I felt Archangel Michael bear down on me. And my solar plexus shot out like a beam of light and went through that closet. And this particular entity tried to get out. And when it did, it went through me, knocked me on my knees. My friend, she has very, very long hair. When this entity went by her, her hair went back. And it flew down the stairs. And when it went out the door, it went out with such a force that the door shut behind it. And I could barely get up. I was zapped of all energy. I was just zapped, like you get electrocuted almost. So that is something that I know these particular, and it's not like it's a ghost. It's not a ghost. This particular entity was a combination of bits and pieces. It's almost like I could see it, but it was really, I could feel it more than anything. But it was like a bad chunk over here and a bad chunk over here. It wasn't like, it was someone who had been killed. That they have totally different energy, like a ghost or someone who had been, locked in the closet or something like this, But when this happened, the owner of the home said, the only person that knows that there was an entity, what was going on, was my priest. I took my daughter and went to my priest because my daughter started cutting herself in that closet and started wearing, the Gothic look, very dark and the safety pins in her face and her ears and all that stuff. And what I realized is that this particular low vibratory rate, they feed off of pain, they feed off of violence and blood. And there has got to be some type of a frequency that binds this type of energy together, and they need to have a source to exist. And I feel like this is it. This gal, when she came home from school that day, noticed immediately her room was fresh and clear. She asked her mother to go shopping and to get new bed covers and bed linens. And she took everything out of her immediately. And she went on to have a great life. She's a mom of kids now and, all of this. But what I like to say to people is if you are moving into a new home or you're acquiring a new space, maybe in a building for an office or anything like that, that you do get a hold of someone that knows how to clear the energy out. Because so many people, I get calls, that say, we were doing great. Everybody was healthy. My husband was making all this money. We move in, we get transferred and we move into this house and it's been nothing but chaos. It's been nothing but everybody has been suffering. And now my husband has lost his job and we're bankrupt. And, I'm sure you've heard it all, but I think it's really important that people do know unseen energy can affect where you live, just like, just like what you said when the program started, about the hauntings and everything.
Mm,
You
mm.
know?
And I think often people can make the mistake, Kimla, that because they might think that their house is new, that it's not going to have any kind of entity
Right.
or anything. The house I lived in was, I mean, it was built in 1750.
Wow.
So that's the kind of cliche for, oh well, it's got to have a ghost because it's very old. Whereas and I know as you touched on, a lot of places in the States, the houses aren't even 50 years old. But I
Right.
think people misunderstand that often the property is built on land, and for me, I'm a big believer that the land can be haunted or to attract
Right.
entities of a variety of forms. And I think often people can make the mistake that, as you say there, Kimberly, they'll put it down to other things, where really it's where the house has been built. It's not the house that's haunted, it's the property that it's built upon.
Right, absolutely. And we find this a lot. I work a lot with ranches, and I find this a
Mm,
lot with Indian sacred burial grounds, or where wars took place, and that kind of a thing. You can
mm,
come up against that, and that the imprints they leave behind imprints, and that's what's another thing. If someone does pass over within your home, they do leave an energy imprint of
mm,
that you
mm,
can send that up into the light, and you can do that. When you're talking about someone who's passed, or somebody who is, let's just say, caught in between the worlds, and you need to assist them to go to the light, that is one type of work that a really good friend of mine, Laura Van Tyne, does. She's
mm,
fabulous at that. But what I'm talking about is, I'm talking about a level of frequency that is not bearing a soul. It is
mm,
not, it is not, it is not a person, a personal imprint of someone who has lived. I'm talking about a conglomeration
mm,
of negative energy that gets to be so powerful, yeah, that it takes on its own life, actually,
mm,
and it can dissipate. You can blow it up and dissipate it in many ways. And the light beam from Archangel Michael, did
mm.
make it move and make it dissipate, and that kind of a thing. So yes, light is the light swords that you see, these Star Trek movies, and things like that. There's a reason why they have them and show them, and I think that's kind of interesting, that that's working on. So, what's your interest next? What are you going to explore next?
Well, I've been asked to here in Sheffield to go and visit a house where they think they might have a poltergeist. Which are in the world of the paranormal, Kimberly, poltergeists are my favourite. I love poltergeists.
Tell me why. Tell me why.
I just find them fascinating because there's something deeply strange about poltergeist cases, because they're not like a normal haunting. Normally when you have a haunted house, and having lived in a haunted house with a ghost with a toilet fetish, it's often footsteps or doors banging or cupboards opening and closing and taps being turned on, Kimla. Poltergeists are a little bit different, aren't they? They're a little bit, some of them are a bit more malignant, some of them are a bit nastier, some of them are a bit noisier. So for me, I'm really interested in them because they seem to occur once again, it's one of these things that they seem to occur all around the world. And I think often when we talk about the paranormal and hauntings, they're quite pleasant, they're quite low key. You might be laid in bed and occasionally you might hear some footsteps on your stairs or down the landing or coming out of a bathroom or something. Or your alarm might go off occasionally in a certain room, or your dog might just watch something like that, or your cat or something. And I'm sure many of us have had that experience. And obviously, being me, I'm always thinking, what are they looking at? I think normal people probably go, yeah. So for me, I think it's the fact that there seems to be such a release of energy in a variety of things that makes me think, well, where is this coming from? Is it something that's actually being released by people and they're unaware of it? Yes. Or is it the fact that people are allowing they're being used as a battery? Mm-hmm. And, as you referred to about when you had your incident and you were struck, you basically felt completely zapped. You were drained. So was it the fact that whatever that was needed your energy to get past you to go out? Or was it the fact that it just fancied, giving you a gut punch on its way because you'd bested it, and it just fancied being a little bit spiteful on its way out because you told it where to go, Kimla. So it's very interesting for me. Why do these incidents occur? And once again, unlike hauntings, most of them are very short-lived. Some can last a couple of weeks, some can last up to a couple of years, but they don't seem to be. So once again, is this an energy thing that they burn themselves out? So for me, there's lots of different aspects of it that I just find not more interesting, because I love ghosts. I'm not saying ghosts are rubbish or anything or whatever, but there's something about poltergeists that deeply fascinates me on several levels.
Right. Well, I feel as though there is an electromagnetic field that they reside on. And I feel like if that electromagnetic field is more charged, they can express themselves more. And I would like to, do you have the machines and all of that to get some valid, electromagnetic evidence or anything like that when you go?
I use normal things just to make sure that, we're not picking up, readings that are just normal, and primarily as well, because as I touched on earlier, I'm a skeptical believer. I like to get rid of all the possible explanations first. And I think as with anything, and also I'm a massive lover of Sherlock Holmes. And I couldn't, you have to forensically look at a situation. And if you're left with a very odd situation, once you've got rid of all the plausible answers, then that gives it more credence. And so for me, I like to cover all the bases. So if there is something that's giving off electrical energy or infrasound or EMF readings, then I think often that can alter a body's perception. It can deal with it. But when you haven't got any of that going off, then all of a sudden you have to open your mind to the possibility that whatever is occurring is drawing its energy from somewhere. And as you say, I've spoken to a couple of parapsychologists that I have the deepest respect for. They believe that they are essentially balls of energy that are able to manifest in whatever way. How they're created is the big issue. And that for me is probably where I sit on things when it comes to that, because they just seem to be so energetic for a little bit. They're like crazy toddlers, aren't they, really?
Right. They just have this expression that, they have to get out. And I have seen entities, and I have seen spirits and things like that. They do travel in that little ball of energy that, Spielberg has caught so wonderfully. And when you do see them, you're like, oh, wow, that is really how they travel, and that is really how they exist. And, the orbs are something that is a great imagery, that we really rely on, because that's exactly what is going on. We're coming to the end of the hour, Paul, and I want to talk a little bit about your show. So if you could please tell the folks out there how to get a hold of your podcasts and be entertained more on these great subjects, I'm sure they'd appreciate it.
No, and firstly, thank you very much for your time and the invitation to speak with you. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you, Kimla. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be in your company and with your listeners. So thank you again. You can find my show, Mysteries and Monsters, on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you find a podcast. And also there is a Mysteries and Monsters YouTube channel. My show is weekly and features myself and some of the best minds from around the world talking about UFO abductions, Bigfoot, ghosts, paranormal incidents, great cases, crazy monsters, whatever you consider. I would think, I've done some recent episodes about fairies and Irish vampires and things like that. So, I think there's a lot going on there. So there should be something for everyone if you just look for Mysteries and Monsters, really.
Great. And if you're out there and you have an experience to share, I'm sure Paul would be grateful for you to get a hold of him and share your experience, because I'm sure he's one to compile all of these fun experiences with the research that he's done. So thank you so much for coming on this evening, and just to kind of talk about all of this stuff. You have this eclectic span of interests on all of these cool subjects, and it's very rare that you get to talk to somebody that really comes forward and is a researcher and likes to interview the best of the best. And you do such a great job on your show, Paul. Thank you so much for coming and being so gracious and allowing us to kind of take a peek into some of the really fun things and unusual phenomena.
You are very welcome.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much. We're going to sign off, and until next time, may the angels protect you and guide you. Good night, everyone.